Wanted to share another celebrity story with you. So it was 2017. It was actually my last derby that I worked before I retired that year, and we were we were with the governor, and it was one of those derbies where there was a lot of high profile people there, and so there was a meeting scheduled with the creator of Uber. And so the guy was in the, I guess, the Jockey Club suites or wherever all the celebrities were at that time, because they kind of move around there. But this particular instance, we went up there to let him have a meeting with him. And so when we got up there, the Churchill Downs security that they had hired blocked the lane on either side of this table that this guy was at. And so people are always moving around, the meet and greets to each other and taking pictures with each other and all that, because you've got the who's who of pretty much anything up there. And so I'm just kind of standing by. I'm watching both directions, and these security guards had blocked that lane on either side of this table, and the table was situated where it was right in the middle of where everybody was kind of walking from one side to the other of this area. And so I look up, and one of the guards has, he's like kind of a bigger guy, and he's doing this number with his, back to us, but he's like watching who's coming. And so I look over, and there's like Travis Tritt and Kid Rock, and I forget who else, but there was two, I know those two, but there was another one, I think, like a singer as well. And they were standing on one side of it, just like waiting, like, why are we being held up here? Well, I look over behind me, and there's Garoppolo, there's Brady, and there's might have been Gronk. I can't remember, but there were three of the Patriot guys, because there's a bunch of them that come every year. And so I was standing there just thinking, man, we are like holding up all these well-known people, with this meeting. But it was the Churchill Downs guys, so, that's on them. And so I was just kind of remaining vigilant, looking around, all this kind of stuff. And so I just kind of glanced at the other side of this table where this Uber owner was. And I did a double take, and I'm like, there's a camera guy that kind of followed us around to take pictures of people that, the governor would talk to. And so I looked down, and I'm like, man, that's Jerry Rice. And I looked over at the photographer guy, and I said, dude, I think that's Jerry Rice. And he looked at me, and he said, that is Jerry Rice. Well, a lady at the table happened to hear me say that, and she says, oh, would you like to meet him? And I'm like, oh, no, ma'am. No. It's okay. I don't want to interrupt him. I said, we're here with the governor, and we're just trying to, keep everybody from, intruding on their talk here. And she goes, oh, no, he would love to talk to you. And I was like, no, I said, it's okay. I was a big fan growing up. I said, it's just a cool thing to be able to see him. She goes, oh, don't think anything of it. So she reaches over there, and she pokes him, and he turns around, and she says, Jerry, this gentleman here with the governor's security, he said he's a big fan of yours. He would like to meet you. And I'm like, oh man. And so he looks over at me, and I don't know much. I didn't know much about Jerry at the time, because I emulated him when I was in high school. He was the big thing, and obviously is arguably the greatest of all time. And so I was just in awe. And he looks over, and he says, well, hey, I'm Jerry. It's nice to meet you. And I'm like, I'm Derek, and it's great to meet you too. And he said, so you watched me when I was playing? I was like, oh yeah. I said, I was in high school when you were starting out there. And I said, I watched all the videos that they would show on the NFL Today or whatever, of how you caught bricks and all this kind of stuff. And he goes, oh yeah. He said, yeah, they made a whole lot about that when I was, when I first came out. And he said, but it's true. And I was like, well, I said, it's an honor to meet you. And I said, it's something I never thought I'd ever get to do. But I said, it's very cool to actually get to talk to you. And so he said, oh, it's my pleasure, my pleasure. And so somebody else kind of asked him something, and he turned around, and I go back to doing what I'm doing. And so then I feel somebody tap me on the shoulder, and I turn around, and it's Jerry Rice again. And he goes, hey, he said, have you been to many of these? And I was like, this is like my 8th one. He goes, oh, wow. He said, man, this is a bucket list thing for me. He said, I've always wanted to come. I've had teammates that have told me I need to go. And he said, and finally, I just said, you know what? I'm going this year. He said, what's it like? I said, you mean like the Derby race? And he said, yeah. I was like, well, I said, you've played in Super Bowls. And I said, and I'm sure you remember the crowd going crazy and all that. I said, there's 160,000 people here. And I said, the cool thing is, when those horses come out of the gate, everybody just like, it place erupts. And I said, and so they go down the front stretch, and then they go around. And I said, and when they're on the back stretch, everybody's quiet. I said, they're watching like the video monitor. They're listening to the guy that's calling the race, try to see where their horse is. And I said, but man, I said, you'll not believe it when they come out of that last turn and start up that straight stretch. I said, you'll be able to hear like the thundering of the hooves. I said, that's all you'll hear. And I said, and then as soon as they come around there, everybody sees where their horse is and everybody goes nuts. I said, the whole place just erupts, dude. And I said, it is awesome. I said, it's one of those things that you have to experience. And I'm glad you're here because it's something everybody should experience. And I said, I didn't know anything about it, how awesome it was until I actually started working these, and it never gets old. He goes, oh man, that sounds awesome. I cannot wait. He goes, I'm so glad I came then. He said, that is great. He said, if you've been here that many times, then I'll trust you. And that is awesome. He said, I can't wait. And I said, well, I'm sure you've had your share of big moments and the crowds and all that stuff. I said, but it's a spectacle. I said, because those horses, I said, you can't beat what athletes those things are. And I said, they just come up through there. And I said, then you just never know who's going to win because the ones will come from the back. And it's just crazy. He goes, oh, thank you so much. He goes, man, it's great to meet you. It sure is. I'm so glad I came. And so I turned around and I shook his hand and he said, hey, you want to get a picture? And I was like, yeah, because I'm not going to turn down a picture with Jerry Rice, especially if he asks it. And so the photographer took a couple of us. He took one of us actually talking, and then he took one of us, posing or whatever. And I'll try to attach him to this, but it was just such a cool moment. And he's one of those guys that I thought would be kind of full of himself or, just arrogant or whatever, but he was the nicest guy. And I'll always remember that because, like I said, he's one of the greats ever in the NFL, and just a good person, good human being. So just want to share that with you.
Just wanted to show the picture of Jerry Rice and me. You can see that. Thought that was pretty cool. And then there's another one that's just got us talking. He's like just shooting the bull. I mean, how can you not like that? So just wanted to attach that to the end of that video. So anyway, thanks for listening, and like and subscribe. I love telling these stories and sharing them with people, and especially those who are fans of the folks that I've gotten to meet. So I know sometimes not every celebrity encounter is a good one, and so I like to share the ones that are. So thanks.